Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I must say I'm very impressed when people speak so many different languages, and I'm very humble when I realize that I speak so few. Antonio here has been my tutor this evening, so I'm really going to try now and murder the Basque language. If I say Arachilion, does that get close? Or Buenos Tardes, or whatever works best for you. But I wanted to, first of all, say thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's a real honor as co-president of PWN Global to be with you in such a beautiful location, may I say. I mean, okay, the weather's been a little bit more like London, but it's been so great, and it is so great to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation. And Emmanuel, thank you so much for the words that you gave. I really loved what you were saying about how this is an obligation that we really start to take more seriously the issues of gender equality and how we build a more just, a more fair society, but actually also how we build more attractive and competitive businesses. And I think that's the kind of key to it all, that there's a real win-win here for us if we address this properly. So I Googled Basque men to see what getting men engaged in the Basque country would be, and this is what came up. I asked Antonio earlier. He says basically that I should be referring to a downsherry. Is that correct? Did I get that right? But again, I murdered that, I know. But I just thought that was such a great. I haven't seen anybody, by the way, in Bilbao with a red hat yet. So I'm wondering whether I made a big mistake. I might be in the wrong place. Now, what am I doing here? You might ask yourself. Why am I in a women's network, or what was a women's network? Can you see one person who doesn't look the same as the others up in this photograph here? Right at the top, at the back, wearing actually something very similar to today. You'll see this strange man who's with all the presidents of all the city networks from PWN Global in our off-site meeting in Oslo last year. And it's a real humbling experience and a real growth experience to be in that company of these very smart, these very capable, these very humorous women, okay? And I won't show you the picture of us in the nightclub later, because that would not give you the right idea. But these women also know how to have a lot of fun. And so I've had to up my level of fun since I joined PWN. Why am I so passionate about gender equality and making sure that we have equal representation for women? It's because of a certain number. Does anyone know what that number represents? 217. It's the number of years that the World Economic Forum says it will take until we reach gender equality in economy and in employment. 217 years, ladies. How does it feel to hear that number? It's definitely, we need to speed up progress, right? Absolutely. But as a man, I feel ashamed and embarrassed that we're in this situation. And why are we in this situation? It's because we have 80% of executive positions filled by men across Europe and even globally. So that's one element. We need to do a better job at gender equality at work. But here's the other side of the equation. Does anyone know what 20% is? It's the proportion of housework, childcare, elder care done by men versus women, okay? So you can see we have a real imbalance here. Until we have more women in executive positions and more men looking after the children or taking paternity leave or working flexibly, we are going to have an imbalance, and it's going to be hard to accelerate that. So that's why I'm so passionate about this topic and speeding up, and I think it is an obligation, as Emmanuel said. This is my other job. I actually work for a living, a company called Mercer. I do quite a bit of speaking events about the future of work. Now, why is that relevant to this topic? It's because actually, in my day job, I speak to a lot of CEOs. And here are some pictures of some of the CEOs that we talk to, okay? Does anyone spot anything about this picture of all the CEOs? What do you see? Not many women, huh, for a start? And all of a certain age generation, more or less. It makes you wonder how long it will take before things really change. But when we talk to those CEOs, actually, they have trouble sleeping at night. Why do they have trouble sleeping at night? It's not because of the bad aircon. It's because they're worried about disruption. They're worried about what's going to happen to their business. Might it still be there next year? Might some competitor have come in, okay, to really disrupt their market? I hear them talking about innovation. How do we get new products? How do we innovate in our business? And how do we grow, okay? And then, of course, they realize if they want to deal with disruption, and if they want to innovate, and if they want to grow, they've got to attract the right talent. And that's where they realize, what Emmanuel was talking about earlier, that they're only really currently pulling on a very restricted talent pool. There's a whole host of talent out there which isn't finding its way into the corporate world and isn't finding its way to the top, okay? And that's a real issue for these people, because it's a burning a platform for these businesses, because if they don't address this issue, they are going to be potentially facing very difficult and challenging business conditions in the coming years. So these CEOs are really worried about this. And PWN says, we can meet these challenges, we can deal with disruption, we can deal with innovation, we can deal with growth if we have balanced leadership. But we need a leadership that looks different to the leadership that it looks today. What is balanced leadership? Okay, I'm sure some of you are asking that question. Well, it is about the proportion of women at the top. As I said earlier, only 20% at the top. But it's also about the talent pipeline that comes through. Why do we find, we'll see in a minute, how women seem to leave companies some way through their careers. It's about equal pay. This is a massive issue at the moment in Europe and I think globally. How do we ensure that women and men get paid fairly for what they do? And it's about leadership culture. Leadership culture in the past has been very, may I say, alpha male dominated, very aggressive, very focused on, dare I say, I think the Americans call it kick ass. I don't know how that translates into the job for the translator there. But basically the leadership culture really is one that may have worked in the past, but is really going to struggle in the future. And it's about leadership competencies. What does it take to be a leader in the world that's changing? As we saw earlier, the business world is changing fast. We're seeing different and new business models. We're seeing different requirements from leaders for the future. And we'll talk about that and what that really means. So that's what we mean by balanced leadership. Why is it important? It's because actually studies show that you get better decisions in your leadership group if you have a balance between men and women, for example. So studies have been done that show that teams that have a gender mix perform better. They perform better in terms of sales and profits and earnings per share, okay? So why wouldn't you have a balanced team? Some interesting studies have been done, for example, about women and risk-taking. And there's an interesting study about whether the financial crisis would have happened to the extent that it did had we had more women in senior financial positions who may not have been prepared to take the degree of risk that some were taking. So better decisions will come if we have more women in leadership. We'll also find it easier to attract the best talent because, as Warren Buffett once said, the reason I've been so successful in investment is I'm only competing against 50% of the talent, i.e. mostly the men. So if you want to attract this talent pool that we were talking about earlier, then you have to think about how you make your company attractive to women. But not just that. Young men now coming into the workforce do not want to work in a company that's dominated in the way that it was before, in a hierarchy, with very command and control forms of leadership. Younger men coming into the organization now want more flexibility. They want balanced leadership. They want to work alongside talented women just as much as talented men. So if you want to attract the talent that's going to Amazon, that's going to Google, that's going to all these startup companies, that's going to make you innovative and deal with disruption, you've got to attract that talent. You won't do it just focusing on the traditional male talent that you might have relied on in the past. And customers. I mean, it's amazing to me. Women make 85% of consumer decisions globally, Okay, I actually read a study. In case you think I made that up, you can go and look it up. There's the Yankovic survey on this. But not only that, in traditional areas that men have dominated in, like deciding who buys the car, 65% of those decisions are actually either made or heavily influenced by women. So if you have a company and you have a lot of female customers, and you don't have any men in leadership, any women in leadership or close to leadership, how are you going to be able to be close to your customers? It's absolutely crazy. And then finally, and this is the real killer, your company will perform better. Various studies by McKinsey, by Catalyst, by Credit Suisse 3000 have shown that companies that have a bigger quantity of women in the board and executive positions perform better. The Credit Suisse survey shows they perform better by 2% per annum if you invest in those companies. And over 10 years, that's a 40% difference in return. So why are we not investing in companies, and why do we not have more women in these senior positions? So this is why it's so important. It is fair, it is just to have an equal representation of women, but it's also fabulous business sense, and I think that's what Emmanuel was referring to earlier. And we talked about the style of leadership. This is a model that one of my co-speakers on a PWN event recently was talking about. She's developed this, and she originally called it the feminine leadership model, because she was trying to encourage women to think of themselves as better leaders. But actually, when you look at the characteristics that we're going to need in our leaders for the future, okay, not the past, the future, whether you're a man or a woman, you are going to need some of these qualities: collaboration, intuition, empathy, humility, vision, vulnerability, for example. Those are qualities that we'll need in our leaders, as well as all of the traditional male assertive, daring, resilient, decisive. Yes, we need that in our leaders, but we need the other side too. And actually what that shows you is that future leaders, women have got a great part to play there. So if we're not attracting women into leadership, we're really missing out big time. And what does the talent of tomorrow want? This is a survey of millennials. How many millennials are there in the room here? Do you want to self-identify? There we are, a couple at the back. Oh, how wonderful. Right, thank you for being here. But I mean, if we want to attract the talent of tomorrow, we've got to think about what millennials want from the workplace. This is a survey that was done by Universum, okay? And some of the conclusions, and I'll pick out two here, underlined. Millennials want a diverse and inclusive workplace. They want to have a fun time working with, women and men and all genders, basically. They want it to be inclusive, okay? That's what they see as very important. And then also, at the top there, they want work-life balance. Now, if I'd asked people of my father's generation about work-life balance, they would have said, what's that? We just have work. There's no life, there's no balance. But millennials want work-life balance. And crucially also, they want a sense of purpose. So how does your company, for example, if you're an organization, generate a sense of purpose for the people that work for you? This is where leaders of tomorrow need to think about the talent that they want. And the talent wants different things. And the talent, especially, I think, both men and women want new things which aren't currently being provided. So hopefully that gives us some hope for the role that women can play and the need to attract women into the talent pool because they've got so much to offer. Now, where are we on gender balance? Because you'd think with all these fabulous advantages of women in the leadership and women in the workforce that we'd have equal representation. Well, I mean, this is the European average done by Mercer, the company I work for. And what we see here is a series of steps from supporting staff at the beginning of the career up to the very top executive position. And you can see female in green and male in black, and the men are roughly 80% at the top, okay? You can see the proportion of women in the organization falls away sharply as you go through the organization. And this is something that most men don't realize, that, wow, is that really happening in our organization? Is that why we're really struggling to attract women? And what happens if we try and hire more women? So these statistics now show companies are trying to hire more women. Can you see at the top there? We're trying to hire executives at almost double the rate we're trying to hire women at the top than we are men. And so you think, oh, great, that's going to fix the problem, right? We won't have to wait 217 years. The trouble is, women are leaving faster at the top, you see, at the other end, okay? So what is happening? It's almost like women get to the top there, look at the culture, look at the work environment, look at the job, and say, you know what? Actually, I'm not so sure this is what I want, okay? So we have to change that in order to really make a difference with these statistics. And of course, we need to get men engaged, but it's difficult. Does anyone know who this is? The Rock, right? Okay, I'm a man, right? I reject all things feminine because that would make me weak and I would not look so good in my other fellow men's eyes, okay? That's a typical male reaction. Another one is, this is about gender. What's that got to do with me? I'm a man, right? Okay, and so that a lot of men are unaware, basically, of the numbers, of the issues, etc. So let's be fair. Maybe they need educating, and then maybe they need help. But that's a typical reaction. So when I'm trying to get men engaged in this, it's a real struggle. Luckily, Antonio doesn't look anything like that, but and he's got a much softer, gentler side, as you'll see. But that's just to kind of try and depict some of the machismo that we see all over Europe, indeed all over the world, when it comes to this issue about men admitting that they're vulnerable, men admitting that, in fact, actually, I don't want to have the whole expectation on my shoulders of the typical thing about be strong, don't cry, all those things that we tell our boys to do. We've got to change how we're educating our sons and our daughters, and this is obviously part of what we're trying to avoid, getting to this point where we feel so as men we solid and impenetrable. We cannot convey our feelings. But of course, as I mentioned, younger men coming into the workforce now are starting to see this differently. And we need to engage men at all levels, basically. Here's a slide that my co-president, Sonia Richardson, in PWN developed. And I liked it, so I stole it for this presentation. So it's actually designed by a woman, but I've stolen it, so I'm going to take all the credit because I'm a man, right? Okay. But basically what she's saying is men don't realize the privilege they have. We don't. We don't realize how lucky we are and how easy we have it in so many different walks of life. And we have this unconscious bias because, for us, these aren't issues. We're unaware of them. So, for example, what it's like walking down a dark street at night, or what it's like to be talked over in a meeting, or to be assumed to be junior, or, to have your ideas questioned. So we don't understand that world so much. And, of course, as I mentioned, this world of the strong man is all about things like, do you have this expression here, mansplaining, where a man will explain to a woman something that's very obvious, as if it's just been invented. We don't invite women to social events. We go to the golf club, and we go to the other social events that don't involve women. We have these things called microaggressions, where we, as I said, we assume women are more junior, we talk over them, etc. We have a stereotyping. Oh, well, okay, you're a woman, you're probably going to want to have kids at some point, so what does that mean for your commitment to leadership, etc.? And we find that, generally speaking, men are not giving women as many promotions, and maybe there's less development opportunities for women as a result. Where we want to get to is where, actually, if men pay attention to this and work on this whole area, actually what can happen, and I'm sure Antonio's going to talk about this, is you develop better relationships with the women that you work with, the women in your life, if you pay attention to this. Actually, as a man, your health can improve as well, if you're getting away from that stereotypical male image and the male pressures. And you get more room for your emotions. I mean, I cry when I go to movies sometimes, I admit, My wife doesn't cry. I don't know why, but, she's here as well, exactly, she can tell you. And men can be more fulfilled as parents. That's something that men increasingly want these days. They don't want to get to 65, retire, and then say, I wish I'd spent more time with my family, which is what you hear so often. And, we can work together in more innovative and fun teams. And Sonia put this last point in, so I can include it because it was included by a woman. Apparently, men find greater sexual satisfaction if there's more equality between men and women. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. That's Sonia's bullet point, but it was interesting. What she's saying, basically, is men have got to start consciously acting and starting to do things like sponsor and mentor the women around them to help them move forward. And do you know who this is? This is that guy that had his arms folded 2 slides ago, right? I'm the Rock, This is the Rock with the Rock's daughter, his daughter, okay? I mean, and what we found is that executives when they think, and well, men at any part of the company, think about their daughters and the future that they want for them, they start thinking, hang on a minute, it isn't right that my daughter is only going to have a 20% chance of getting to the top. She's going to be paid 25% less than a man. She's going to have to deal with microaggressions and stupid things that men say to her. When you think about it like that, that's a really good way, I think, to get more men engaged in it. So men, what can you do? Often men will say to me, okay, I'd love to get involved. I'd love to do more. What can I do? The first thing I say to men they need to do, and it's the most difficult thing for any man to do, is what? Listen. Okay, oh my God, we're so busy telling women and telling people how great we are and how wonderful everything is, you know, but we actually have to listen first, okay, and educate ourselves about the challenges of women. And for Mercer, I had a video made of the women at Mercer in our company talking about what it was like to be a woman in the company, okay, and also what they wanted to see more of from the men in the company. We had a meeting of men only at Mercer because we had this new program to try and get men engaged. And at the meeting, there was 100 men in the room, okay? All men were trying to get together to talk about the issues. And I played the video that the women made of what it was like to work in the company. And the men were astonished. They had no idea of what it was like to work in the company from a woman's perspective. And so we've now got a lot more men engaged in this as a result. And what the men basically said was, when we got together, and what we found is a lot of the men actually, you know, they wanted to talk about this issue. They wanted to engage with it. They said, let's challenge these negative behaviors and the biases that we see. Let's take the lead and speak up about the issues that we see, as Emmanuel's mentioned. And let's mentor and sponsor women. Let's role model this at work. So maybe we work more flexibly. Maybe we take parental leave. Maybe we show, as leaders, our example, and we do that. We're open about our life commitments. This thing about, you know, saying, yes, it's 4 o'clock in the office, I need to go because my daughter has a school play, or I've got to go and do something else to involve with the family. You know, be open about those commitments, because basically that's a part of you as a human being in your life. And finally, I think really nothing is going to change unless you get involved and unless you make a difference, okay? We've got to squeeze 217 years into 0 as quickly as we can. So men, we all need you tonight, and I'm delighted that we're going to be able to pass over to Antonio and the panel tonight to talk about how we might do that. So thank you very much, and we're looking forward to the rest of the discussion.